Mandy and I welcome you back to day 39 of Reading the Bible 365. Today we're going to do Matthew 14 through 16. Remember, I love to highlight verses I love in Matthew in green because it's one of the Gospels. There's 117 chapters in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts, and Matthew has 28 chapters. And last week when we read Matthew 13, there was all the parables. Remember those? So now we're going to start with Matthew chapter 14. John the Baptist beheaded. At that time, Herod the tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him." Now Herod, who had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered him a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Here's what's going on. Herod's here. He has a brother Philip over here. He took his brother Philip's wife, Herodias, and married her, which is not a good thing to be doing, right? So John the Baptist went and tried to tell him, hey, this isn't a good thing to be doing in God's eyes. But Herod didn't care, and so now he's going to have John beheaded. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and he had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought to them on a platter and given to the girl who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. What a sad ending for John the Baptist. He was so faithful. He was the forerunner for Jesus. But now we're going to move on to Jesus feeds the 5,000. Jesus feeds the 5,000. When Jesus heard what happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place, which just shows us right there that he cared about people. He cared about his cousin John, and he got sad about things because, his cousin was just beheaded, mainly on account of Jesus, who's trying to teach people to be doing the right thing, and that's what John the Baptist was trying to get Herod to do. So he withdrew to a private place so he could just have some time of rest and prayer. Hearing this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. He gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. I love this miracle so much. And like they say there at the end, there was probably 5,000 men, but back then they didn't count women and children. So there was probably maybe up to 10,000 people. I love in verse 16 when Jesus said, "They do not need to go away. You give them to something to eat." So he's telling them, you know what? You can try to help figure this problem out. So I love how he involves them in that. And then they go and they do find a boy who has a small lunch, right? 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then they do bring that here and they say, well, at least we have this. This is what we can work with. And to Jesus, that was enough because he said, "Bring them here to me." He directed the people to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. So he's praying to his Father in heaven because he knows that God can deliver. And when he started breaking the loaves and the fish, they just multiplied, and they had the 12 baskets left over. So I love that there was 12 baskets. Why? 1 for each disciple. And as they gathered up the leftovers, they must have been thinking, wow, how did this happen? How did we just feed 5,000 people with 1 boy's lunch? And not only was everybody satisfied, but 12 baskets left over. So I love that. Jesus goes above and beyond what we need. I like this little commentary on Matthew 14. This is with the 5,000. Jesus says, "You give them something to eat." So the disciples threw up their arms and said, "But we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish." With the problem identified and his followers at a loss at how to fix it, Jesus went into action. He said in effect, "Bring your not enough to me." And he blessed what they had. Miraculously, the disciples were able to give enough food to 5,000 men, besides women and children, perhaps 15 to 20,000 people. Not only that, but the disciples also picked up 12 baskets full of leftover pieces. That's so amazing, isn't it? In other words, each of the 12 got a doggy bag to remind them of what Jesus could do. Not enough can become more than enough when 2 things happen. First, rather than dismissing it, bring what little you have to Jesus. Second, believe that Jesus can intercede in your situation, bringing abundance out of deficiency. Put him first and see what he can do. He can demonstrate the supernatural in the midst of your natural problem. Jesus walks on the water. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. I love the miracle with the walking on the water. I mean, we kind of get down on Peter because he sank, but guess what? He's the only one who got out of the boat. Everyone else was in the boat, but he was brave enough to say, "Lord, if it's you, call me and I will come out." And he went out. He had the faith to get out of the boat. But what happened? He started looking around at the winds and the waves all around him. He took his eyes off Jesus and started looking around. And that's when he sank. And friends, that's the same thing with us. When we have problems, we don't need to be looking around at the swirling storm and the lightning and the rain and everything coming at us. All we have to do is keep our eyes on Jesus. And when we keep our eyes on Jesus, we'll be able to do things. Maybe not walk on the water, but we'll be able to get through our troubles. But when we take our eyes off of Jesus, that's for sure when we sink. Matthew chapter 15, clean and unclean. Then some Pharisees and the teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Here we are, picking on Jesus once again. I guess they don't have enough to do. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of your God for the sake of tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses his father or mother must be put to death. But you say that if a man says to his father or mother, 'Whatever help you might otherwise have received from me is a gift devoted to God,' he is not to honor his father with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men." Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth, that is what makes him unclean." Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" He replied, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. Leave them. They are blind guides. If a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into the pit." Peter said, "Explain the parable to us." "Are you still so dull?" Those poor disciples, are you still so dull? Poor Jesus, he just must have been so frustrated because they just didn't get it. "Are you still so dull?" Jesus asked them. Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these make a man unclean. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what make a man unclean. But eating with unwashed hands does not make him unclean. Here's a commentary on Matthew 15. In the light of his confrontation with the Pharisees and scribes, Jesus gathered the crowd to explain where true defilement comes from. The Pharisees ritualistically washed their hands before meals as a means of keeping themselves pure and undefiled. To be defiled religiously is to become dirty or polluted by sin. But Jesus turned wrong thinking about the topic on its head. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. Moral pollution, then, comes from the inside, not the outside. Your unwashed hands are not the problem. Your dirty heart is. Backing that one up, let's read that again. Your unwashed hands are not the problem. Your dirty heart is. We tend to justify our sinful words and actions by pointing to what others did that caused our responses. But our circumstances don't cause our sin. They just provide the context and the opportunity for the sinful desires ruling our hearts to express themselves. Defilement is an internal matter, and external activity can't change a heart. I have a little note over here. Satan is trying to get in the door to my mind to get a foothold into my heart. I need to Philippians 4:8 him. So let's read how to Philippians 4:8 the devil. Philippians 4:8 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." And that's how you Philippians 4:8 the devil, by thinking on those good things. I love that. I love this next section, the faith of the Canaanite woman. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David." I have a note out here. So here comes a woman. Jesus is trying to get away, and she is a pest. She doesn't take no for an answer. And we also should not give up on praying and trying. "Have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel." And I have a note out here. Jesus did not answer her. Her race was wrong and the timing was bad, but she kept bugging him. The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, Lord," she said, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request has been granted." And her daughter was healed at that very hour. When he says it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs, he's saying his children of Israel is not right to take their gifts and him healing them and just throw it over here to the dogs, which she was a different race, so she was considered like a dog. But then she comes and says, what? But even dogs get under the table and get the crumbs. She had such great faith. She's like, I don't need the bread from you, Jesus. I just need a crumb. And she knew if she could just have a crumb, that her daughter would be healed. And he's like, you know what? You have great faith. And so he said, go, your daughter is healed. And she was healed at that hour. I hope I can have great faith like that. Jesus feeds the 4,000. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. His disciples answered, Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000, besides women and children. And after Jesus sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. Here's a commentary on Jesus feeding the 4,000. He had been with them for days, and he didn't want to send them away hungry. He was concerned for their physical and social well-being. But the disciples pointed out they only had 7 loaves and a few small fish. So Jesus commanded the crowds to sit down, took the loaves and fish, and did an amazing thing. He gave thanks for insufficiency. When you have a need, give thanks for what you have, and let God multiply it to what you need. Oh, that was really good. Let's back that one up. He gave thanks for insufficiency. How often do we just complain about what we don't have or that we don't have enough? But he gave thanks for the little bit that they had. When you have a need, give thanks for what you have and let God multiply it to what you need. Jesus miraculously gave enough food to feed the crowds, 4,000 men, besides women and children. Notice, though, that the food didn't supernaturally appear in the hands of the crowd. Rather, he used his disciples to distribute it. Jesus is at the center of his kingdom rule, and he calls his disciples to be distributors on his behalf of the blessings, provisions, power, and message of the kingdom. Matthew chapter 16, demand for a sign. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, "When evening comes, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red,' and in the morning, 'Today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast.' You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Jesus then left them and went away. The yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. When they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. "Be careful," Jesus said. "Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." They discussed this among themselves and said, "It is because we didn't bring any bread." Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, "You of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I am not talking to you about bread?" Jesus must just be about to lose his mind at this point because they're just not picking up what he is laying down. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Peter's confession of Christ. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he warned the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. I love this commentary. Simon Peter quickly and correctly answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus affirmed this great confession of faith by praising God the Father for revealing this truth to Peter and blessing him. That opened the door for an announcement from Jesus. Something so awesome that hell itself can't overpower it was coming. The church. No matter how Satan attacks, the church will win and hell will lose. The offensive advance of the church exercising kingdom authority overrides hell's attempts to stop it. But how would Jesus accomplish his building program? Since Peter confessed Jesus as the Christ, Jesus used his name in a word play. In Greek, Peter's name is Petros, which means stone. But Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." He then used the Greek word Petra, which means collection of rocks knitted together to form a larger slab. Jesus' church then would be comprised of his unified followers who confessed him as the Christ, the Son of the living God, as Peter did. Jesus predicts his death. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And I have a note here. Jesus wanted to prepare his disciples for what was to come. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." So poor Peter, he goes from verse 18 being called the rock on which God's going to build his church. Verse 23, Jesus is saying, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, he went from a high to a low really quick. But let's read about this. Peter took him aside and rebuked him. "This will never happen to you." Peter had just confessed Jesus to be the Christ, the Son of God. Unfortunately, though, when he opened his mouth this time, things went downhill. Not days later, but only a few minutes later, Peter had gone from being blessed to being reprimanded, as Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus knew something wicked was operating behind Peter's statement. His confession of Jesus as the Messiah was the work of God. His attempt to protect Jesus was the work of the devil. Any attempt to make Jesus king without the cross, remember Satan's temptations in 4 verses 2 to 10, is an attempt to thwart God's plan of salvation. Instead of being a stone, Peter had become a hindrance, which could also be translated stumbling block. So again, poor Peter, he was just trying to protect Jesus. Jesus was his friend, his rabbi. And when someone talks about that he's going to die, of course you're going to say, "No, that will never happen. I'm going to try to protect him." But if he would protect him from being killed and crucified on the cross, then what would that do? That would kind of put a, thwart God's plan. God's plan was that Jesus would die. So even though Peter was trying to do a good thing, Jesus was saying, "Get behind me, Satan," because he didn't want anything to stop his march toward the cross, because he was going to the cross, you guys, for you and for me. And that's what he was going to do. And he didn't want Peter or anybody to stop him, even though Peter loved him and was just trying to protect his friend. Jesus turned and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each one according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And I have over here the cost of the call. Carrying the cross means death to self and dying to myself, so that way I live my life Jesus' way. One more commentary here and we're done. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life because of me will find it. Many people misread, thinking Jesus is speaking of salvation. But remember, Peter is already a believer here. Thus, Jesus spoke about the daily commitment of being a disciple. If you want to run your own life, you'll find that you lose the life you were looking for. If you totally identify with Jesus and live according to his agenda, you'll find the abundant life you never knew was possible. See John 10:10. What good is it to gain worldly stuff while losing spiritual blessings and the peace that make life worthwhile? There we have Matthew 14 through 16. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got a lot out of this. We're getting kind of where Jesus is turning the corner, and now he's going to be, always talking about his death and talking about following him and how hard it is. So the kind of glory days with the parables and miracles are kind of coming to an end, and we're going to be turning up toward his death now. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you come back again tomorrow, because remember what I say. What do I say, Mandy? God's word in your heart is the best way to live. Mandy's ready to go. We'll see you tomorrow. If you enjoyed this message today, I would appreciate a thumbs up. I would also love it if you would subscribe to my channel and pass it along to other friends who want to strengthen their faith in Jesus. I would love a comment on what you liked and also future topics you would like me to talk about. I would also love to answer any question you may have about how to put your faith in Jesus, the Christmas story, Easter story, anything at all. You can contact me through my website, which is nancyjoy2you. That's nancyjoy, the number 2, the letter U.com. You can also email me at nancyjoy2you@gmail.com. Hope to see you tomorrow.